We'll continue to look at the different parts of speech and how to identify them. In this part, we'll look at verbs. From a functional perspective, verbs are often referred to as doing words. But verbs don't necessarily refer to actions. If I say, I drink beer, then I'm doing something to the beer, so drink fits the description of a doing word. But if I say, I like beer, I'm not actually doing anything. I'm just talking about a state or a feeling, but like is still a verb. So verbs can refer to actions like drink or run or kick, but they can also refer to events that take place without anyone consciously doing them, like fall or die, or to states such as like or know or hang, as in the painting hangs on the wall. The morphological clues for verbs in English are more useful. All English verbs are inflected for tense, that is, they have a present tense form, talks or sits, and a past tense form, talked or sat. The present tense of a verb can be just the base form, that is, just the verb itself without anything added to it, as in, I like ice cream, they play football. If the subject of the verb is third person singular, so something that could be replaced with he or she or it, then the present tense of the verb has the suffix s. He likes ice cream, my sister plays football. The forms with s and without s, like and likes, play and plays, are both present tense. The difference is whether the subject is third person singular or something else. For most verbs, the past tense is made by adding the suffix ed. Kick, kicked, like, liked, play, played. So we can say that there's a rule in English that says, make the past tense by adding ed. If a verb follows this rule for how to make the past tense, then it's called a regular verb. But there are some verbs that the rule doesn't work for. The past tense of drink isn't drinked, it's drank. The past tense of fall isn't falled, it's fell. And the past tense of know isn't knowed, it's knew. Verbs that the past tense rule doesn't work for are called irregular verbs. And for irregular verbs, there's no way of telling what the past tense is going to be. Why is went the past tense of go? It's just something that we have to learn individually for each irregular verb. For native speakers of English, this isn't something that we have to think about. We just know what the forms are and we use them without any effort. But for people learning English as a second language, learning the forms of irregular verbs can be challenging. There are two other forms of the verb in English. There's the ing form, as in she is singing, and there's the en or ed form, as in she has eaten all the cake. These forms are called participles. A participle is a verb form which isn't a tense. This means that they can't be used to form a sentence on their own. In standard English, we can't just say she singing or she eaten all the cake. The reason for this is that all sentences in standard English have to have a tense. And because participles aren't tenses, they don't fulfill this requirement. And because of that, they have to combine with an auxiliary, a little helping verb, which goes in front of the participle and has the tense on it. She is singing, present tense. She was singing, past tense. Unfortunately, the traditional names for the participle are present participle for the ing form and past participle for the en or ed form. And this is confusing because present and past makes you think of tense, and the participles aren't actually tenses. So you may find it easier to just think of them as the ing form and the en or ed form. To sum up what we've said so far, there are 5 forms of the verb in English. The base form, play, sing. The S form, plays, sings. The past tense, played if the verb is regular, sang if the verb is irregular. The present participle, playing, singing. And the past participle, played, sung. You may have noticed that for the regular verbs like play, the past participle looks the same as the past tense. We'll discuss this more when we talk about tense and aspect later in the course. From the point of view of syntax, the verb is a core part of the clause. Every normal clause in English has to have at least a main verb. And the main verb can combine with one or more auxiliaries. Auxiliaries are helping verbs that come in front of a main verb to help express the meaning. In the sentence, he must have eaten all the cake. The main verb is eaten, and must and have are auxiliaries. If there is only one verb in a clause, then that is the main verb. If there's more than one verb, then the main verb is always the last one, and the ones coming before it are auxiliaries. There are 2 types of auxiliaries in English. The first type is called primary auxiliaries. There's only 4 of these: be, have, do, and get. But they can be difficult to recognize because they're extremely irregular, especially be, which has all these different forms. Primary auxiliaries are different from all other verbs in English in that they can function either as main verbs or as auxiliaries. So they can be the only verb in a clause, like in these examples. He is happy. I have a new car. She did her homework. He got a lift from his colleague. In each of these sentences, the primary auxiliary is the only verb, and so it's the main verb. But the primary auxiliaries can also come in front of another verb, and then they function as auxiliaries. He is eating lunch, where eating is the main verb and is an auxiliary. I have forgotten his name. Forgotten is the main verb and have is an auxiliary. She didn't understand what I said. Understand is the main verb. Did is an auxiliary. He got robbed on his way home. Robbed is the main verb and got is an auxiliary. It's important to understand that these verbs can be used either as auxiliaries or as main verbs, but they can't be both at the same time. So if be, have, do, or get is functioning as the main verb, it is not an auxiliary. The second type of auxiliaries are called modal auxiliaries. There's 9 of those in English: can, could, shall, should, will, would, may, might, and must. Modal auxiliaries are different from other verbs in English in a number of ways. They can never be used as main verbs. You can't say, she might it, or he will that. They don't have the S form that all other verbs have. You can't say, he mights cry, or she musts come. And they don't have participle forms. There are no forms in English like coulding or musted. Types of main verb. So, there can be 2 types of verb in a clause. There always has to be a main verb, and there could also be 1 or more auxiliaries. We've looked at different types of auxiliaries, but main verbs come in different types too. And these types are related to the kinds of things that the verb has to combine with in order to form a clause. An intransitive verb doesn't need anything following it. If we take a verb like sleep, then a clause like Kim slept makes perfect sense. It doesn't need anything else in it. A verb that doesn't need anything following it is called an intransitive verb. But if we look at a verb like smash, then Kim smashed doesn't make sense. There has to be something that Kim smashed. This verb needs a noun phrase following it. If we say Kim smashed the window, then the clause is fine. So a verb like this, which has to have a noun phrase following it in order to form a clause, is called a transitive verb. The noun phrase that follows the transitive verb, the window in our example, is called the object of the verb. We can see that the difference between a transitive and an intransitive verb is that the intransitive verb can't have an object noun phrase. We can't say, Kim slept the bed. We could say, Kim slept in the bed, but in the bed is not a noun phrase. It's a prepositional phrase. And it's also optional. It doesn't have to be there. In fact, we can put prepositional phrases after both transitive and intransitive verbs. Kim smashed the window in the middle of the night. So the difference between transitive and intransitive verbs is that transitive verbs have to have an object noun phrase following them, while intransitive verbs can't have an object noun phrase following them. There are a few verbs which actually need two noun phrases following them. In the sentence, Kim gave the teacher an apple, there are two noun phrases following gave, the teacher, and an apple. Both of them have to be there. We can't just say Kim gave the teacher, and we can't just say Kim gave an apple. We call give a ditransitive verb. It has two objects. The direct object, which is an apple, the thing being given, and the indirect object, the teacher, the person that the apple is being given to. In fact, the indirect object could also be a prepositional phrase. Kim gave an apple to the teacher. The last type of main verb is called a copula. It's useful to compare copulas to other kinds of verbs in order to understand what they do. If I say Kim hit a student, then I'm talking about Kim doing something to a student. That's Kim, and that's the student, and Kim does something that affects the student. But if I say Kim is a student, I'm not talking about Kim doing something to a student. I'm saying that Kim and the student are the same person. The verb be, or is, acts here like a kind of equals sign. It just links up what comes before it with what comes after it. It doesn't really have much of a meaning of its own. It just says that whatever comes after the verb is a property of what comes before the verb. So in the sentence, Kim is a student, is telling us that being a student is a property of Kim. This is different from Kim hit a student, where Kim and the student are two different people, and we're talking about one doing something to the other. This type of verb, which just links up what comes before it with what comes after it, is called a copula. The most common copula verb in English is be, when be is used as a main verb. Remember that be is one of those primary auxiliaries which can function either as an auxiliary or as a main verb. When it is a main verb, we call it a copula. If it comes before another verb, it's an auxiliary and not a copula. There are three types of phrases that can follow a copula. A noun phrase, Kim is a student. An adjective phrase, Kim is happy. Or a prepositional phrase, Kim is in the garden. The phrase that follows the copula is called the complement of the copula. So in Kim is a student is the complement. In Kim is happy, happy is the complement. In Kim is in the garden is the complement.